Counterfeit ring busted in Chinchilla. The Black Hand in Scranton was notorious for shaking down other Italians, but they had their tentacles into other businesses as well. One of the most spectacular crimes came to light when police busted a counterfeit operation in Chinchilla, Pennsylvania, on April 29, 1915. For months, investigators built their case against the operation thanks to the work of well-known and well-respected Scranton Police Detective John Carticello. Carticello had been instrumental in dozens of cases against the Black Hand. In October of 1914, he was led to believe an operation was in business, cranking out half-dollar coins. While it doesn't sound like a lot today, in 1914, each half-dollar coin would be worth about $15 today. 6 law enforcement officials were part of the raid. It was reported that one was dressed as a tramp, one as a hunter, and the others in rundown clothes that made them look like hobos. The men stormed the building, guns drawn, shouting in English and Italian, "Hands up! The man who moves is dead." Without any further drama, 5 men were taken into custody. Thankfully, officers were able to surprise the operation, thanks to 2 of the lookouts who were allegedly deep into a game of cards in the barn. If the faintest hint of a raid was coming, the men had a cache of weapons at their disposal, including a repeating rifle of the heaviest caliber ever seen hereabouts, 2 loaded double-barrel shotguns, 2 loaded revolvers, and 6 sticks of dynamite. 2 of the men were also carrying stiletto knives with 8-inch blades, a tool of choice for the Black Hand. In addition to their armory, the men were caught red-handed, with all of the necessities for making thousands of counterfeit coins. The list of items seized during the raid included 2 tools to make the coins, 10 spurious, fake coins, 6 good coins, a pile of Babbitt metal, tin, acid, plaster of Paris, bicarbonate soda, a clay mold, and other tools of the trade. The players involved were either already known to law enforcement or were tangled up with the Black Hand in Bull's Head, the hotbed of nefarious activities in the city during this time period. The leader of the gang was said to be Vincenzo Piccone, 30. Piccone had already been arrested 7 times on counterfeit charges out of New York. Each time, with one exception, he evaded conviction. He said to live in both New York City and South Scranton. Just a few months prior, he was also implicated in a holdup at the Berrida chemical manufacturing plant along the Laurel Line in what was known as Little Virginia, near Davis Street. He's married, without any children, and is an immigrant from Agrigento, Sicily. George Mangano, 29, was originally from Nicastro, Calabria, Italy. He was involved in the Rosario Cuda murder in Bull's Head just 6 months ago. He was initially arrested but released after Frank Greco confessed to the murder. Gaspar Marchanti, 31, of Westside, was listed as an oil agent on his naturalization papers. He immigrated to the U.S. from Caltabellata, Sicily in 1903 and was a grocer who sold imported olive oil. Gaspar was no stranger to crime as he was tied to an explosion at Giovanni Fazio's macaroni factory on Franklin Avenue on New Year's Day, 1906. The Fazio factory had been hit twice by the Black Hand. The 2 younger men included Tony Ducati and Michael Esposito, also known as Michael Sposito. Ducati, 19, was listed as a barber, was arrested in 1914 for hopping a rail produce car, and was found with a gun in his possession. He was also implicated in a Black Hand extortion scheme, but charges were dropped when the victim refused to testify. Esposito, 22, also a barber, was the lessee on the property. The investigation began in October 1914 when Angelo Minoni, 24, was arrested for passing a bad coin at the Delaware and Hudson line. At the time of his arrest, he had 195 counterfeit coins in his pockets. That would be almost $3,000 today. Police were not impressed with the workmanship of the coins. A lead-based alloy was said to be used, and coins didn't look or feel like the real deal. Under questioning, Minoni told police that he bought the coins from a man he had met at the Laurel Line earlier in the day. He explained that the man told him he had too much silver, and he wanted to exchange it for paper money. Minoni said he had paper and didn't mind having the coins, and that he liked to jingle them in his pockets. Police didn't believe this story and pressed on. They believed that Minoni was simply a runner for the larger outfit and would eventually break under pressure. 2 days later, police arrested Diego Sardegna, owner of an olive oil store on Locust Street in South Scranton, in connection with the coins. Both men were placed in the Lackawanna County Jail while they awaited trial. Minoni wasn't the only one to be caught with the fake coins. Days later, police arrested 2 other Philadelphia men in connection with the phony money, and there were reports that the fake coins were turning up all over the state. It eventually got to the point where police had to put out bulletins to be on the lookout for the fake coins, as banks and merchants were discovered to have them in their possession. As the trial neared, a swarthy, heavy-set, scowling individual visited Manoni and Sardegna in jail. It was believed that the man was there to intimidate the accused, as well as the prosecutors. That man, Detective Chinchilla determined, was Vincenzo Picone, brother-in-law of the imprisoned Diego Sardegna. While in jail, Sardegna was also visited by his young daughter, likely Grace. He allegedly told her, "You must not believe that Papa is guilty." In spite of his words to his daughter, both men would plead guilty and be sentenced to time served 4 months, plus 2 months for Manoni and 5 months for Sardegna. The light sentences were due in part because this was both their first offense. Picone was already known to Chinchilla. Months earlier, the detective learned that Picone had offered to train a man on how to counterfeit money. In letters between Picone and Marchanti, the West Scranton man offered to pay Picone $10 in exchange for the supplies to make 50-cent cigars. Code police believed for the fake coins. Detectives had intercepted the letters, steamed them open, photocopied the contents, then sealed them up and sent them on their way. With that combination of evidence, Chinchilla started to watch Picone's every move. The detective even coordinated with the United States Secret Service to have Picone trailed in New York City. In case you didn't know, the Secret Service was initially founded in 1865 to investigate all counterfeit operations that involve U.S. currency. Today, they still hold that responsibility, among other duties. It was determined that just 2 weeks before the raid, Esposito leased land in Chinchilla from Dr. D. Jenkins of North Scranton. The small bungalow was along Northern Boulevard, across from the current post office. The building was set back about 200 yards from the main road and perched up on a hill, providing a view of the valley below. My guess is that it was likely where I-81 is today. Esposito and his wife, the former Anna Trunzo, were married in 1913 when he was 20 and Anna was just 15. Together, they operated a farm on the property as a front to the operation. It was said that Mrs. Esposito, now 17, would take an old mule and deliver eggs to customers in the city. The legitimacy of the business quickly became questionable when it was known that they would have to buy their eggs elsewhere to fulfill orders because they didn't have enough chickens of their own. On the morning of the raid, as the men were set to meet at the farm for production, Picone grew suspicious. He felt that Chinchilla was onto him. Picone visited a friend's house in West Scranton near the detective's home at 122 St. Francis Cabrini Avenue. He waited for the detective to pass by on his way to work so he could strike up a conversation with him, seemingly to let the detective know his location. His plan worked. Chinchilla saw Picone standing in a doorway, and they had a quick conversation. Picone told him that he had other plans for the day to try to throw the detective off his tail, or so he thought. Chinchilla continued on his commute to his office downtown. At police headquarters, a man approached Detective Chinchilla and asked him strange questions. The detective saw through the farce and realized that the man was tailing him and reporting back to Picone. The detective played along until the man eventually left the station. Once he did, the group of 6 officers took off for Chinchilla in a large touring car. Once there, 3 men went around the back of the cabin, and 3 approached from the front. They quickly entered the building and were able to detain all of the men without any issues. All 5 men were summoned to appear in court in Sunbury the following Tuesday, May 4, 1915. The 2 young men, Ducati and Esposito, had already confessed to the crime, but prosecutors didn't want a plea bargain in exchange for lighter sentences. All 5 men were quickly convicted. Picone was sentenced to 6 years and 6 months. Marchanti received 4 years and 6 months. Ducati and Esposito each got 2 years, and Mangano initially received 4 years. Leaving the courtroom, Mangano, who had stared at Chinchilla the entire trial, said to the detective in his native Italian language, "4 years won't be long passing, and by God's mother, I'll stab you to death when I come out." The judge heard the threat and ordered Mangano back into the courtroom for questioning. Mangano, talking through an interpreter, admitted to making the threat. He said, "Well, he sent me to die in jail. I don't see why he should not die too." With that, the judge modified the sentence by adding 6 additional years in jail, for a total of 10 years. All of the men initially reported to Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, but would later be transferred to the United States Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. This facility in Atlanta housed other New York City mobsters, including Giuseppe Clutch Morello, founder of the Morello crime family, and his underboss brother-in-law, Ignacio Lupo, both of whom were also convicted of counterfeiting in 1910. In 1915 alone, there were over 65 new inmates sent to this facility for counterfeiting, the highest number of new inmates for counterfeiting during that time frame. Mangano would be released on January 25, 1922, after serving almost 6.5 years. Within 2.5 years of his release, Mangano was shot to death in a gun battle in Bull's Head. Ducati was released on December 16, 1916, after serving just 17 months of his 24-month term. His freedom didn't last long, and his incarceration did not reform him. He was convicted in 1918 of the Bull's Head slashing of John Sharrow and sent back to Eastern State Penitentiary for a maximum 7-year sentence. Once again, he was promptly released after just 18 months. He was married in Scranton in 1928 and eventually moved to New York City and spent the rest of his days, allegedly, as a barber. Michael Esposito would serve his full sentence in jail and, within 18 months of his release, was stabbed to death in Bull's Head. Gaspar Marchionte would die of illness in the Hillside home in 1929 at the age of 46. The ringleader, Vincent Picone, was also transferred to the Georgia prison and was ultimately released on February 24, 1920. He served just under 5 years of his 6.5-year term. Upon his release, he returned to New York City. The best I can tell is that he divorced his first wife, likely during his prison time, and remarried shortly after returning to the city. It looks like Picone died of a heart condition in 1923 at the age of just 38. He left behind a wife and a newborn son. Detective John Carticello gained tremendous accolades for his efforts in taking down this ring. While there were others involved, all pointed to the detective as the mastermind behind the bust. Carticello went on to have a long and prosperous career in police work and later as a private investigator. He left his job at the city and opened Carticello's detective agency in 1922. However, he wasn't without his faults. He and his brother, a city alderman, were arrested in 1929 for kidnapping a man. The man was wanted for spousal support in New Jersey. He was in Scranton, so the alderman and the detective took the man, against his will, back to the New Jersey state line and handed him over to authorities. The two brothers would eventually be exonerated of the crime. Detective Carticello passed away in Scranton in 1973 at the age of 89, but his legacy in protecting the city lives on. Thank you, Detective Carticello.